I'm Jeff Cohen. Chanan Kaufman has created or helped create some of the most influential Jewish outreach organizations in the world. Aish HaTorah New York, Jerusalem Fellowships, Bizrael, and GoInspire, among others. His path almost included medical school, but a chance meeting led him to Jewish learning, rabbinical ordination, and marriage before becoming a leader in the world of kiruv.
There's only one rule about education in the entire Torah. It's chanach lenar lefi darko. You must present the deep ideas and the most important concepts to people in a way that's relevant and geared specifically for them.
Chanan Kaufman, thank you for joining me on Saturday to Shabbos.
Thank you, Jeff.
Give me a sense of your upbringing and what your life was like from a Jewish perspective as a child.
Fair Lawn, New Jersey. Well, I grew up in Fair Lawn. I went to Fair Lawn High School, went to Hebrew school, afternoon Hebrew school, which was a disaster. And I graduated with distinction without honors. And I probably knew 4 letters of the alphabet. And I knew one phrase, sheket b'vakasha. I knew it meant shut up, but I thought it meant shut up or I'll kill you. B'vakasha means please. So it wasn't very inspirational.
Where are you sitting right now? What are we hearing in the background?
Yeah, I'm sitting in the neighborhood Ramat Eshkol, which is a lot of Americans, young American couples living here. It's in Jerusalem. It's a very lively neighborhood with lots of little kiddies.
So let me just go back to your story for a minute. So you're growing up in Fair Lawn, you're not observant, you get through high school, now you're going to college. So at this point, where did you go to college? And is an observant life anywhere on the radar at this point as you're going through college and what you're thinking about doing career-wise?
No. I went to the University of Maryland in College Park, which had a lot of Jews. And it was interesting, as I matured in high school, I gravitated towards Jewish friends in a natural way. It was part of my maturation, it was part of my personality, and I ended up having more and more Jewish friends. I also had Jewish friends in college, and it was something that was very natural, and that sort of guided me in my journey, I guess. I was not a great student, and when I got to college, I decided to buckle down, and I became a really, really good student. I graduated honors, I graduated 3.5 years. I was in an honor program in science and biology, and I got into medical school. So I got in, I graduated early, and there was no question I was going to put on a backpack and go travel somewhere. And that time, a friend of mine from Fair Lawn had been to Israel. And, they went on kibbutz and that kind of thing. That was very popular back then. My friends told me about Israel. So I got a flight to Israel with a backpack. And I was going to rail through Europe. And I had anywhere from 4 to 5 months to do this. And I figured I'll go to Israel first, and I'd work there for a while, then move on. I got to Israel, and the next morning, so I woke up, I had a backpack, and I had a pen, and I look at my map, and I'm marking it, and I wanted to put in my backpack, but I couldn't reach. So I went up to some guy who looked European and had some suitcases. I said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And he said, "Yeah, a little bit." I said, "Wow." I said, "Where are you from?" He says, "Fair Lawn, New Jersey."
You're like,
right?
Whoa.
So I said, "What's your name?" He says, "Stu Rexon." So I know you. We went to high school together. He said, "You're ahead of me." So he said, "Look, I'm traveling. And I said, I had the travel bug. I said, "Well, maybe I'll go to kibbutz later. We'll travel. We'll go down south to Dahav and Sharm el-Sheikh, which was part of Israel, on the Red Sea." So we traveled around in a circuitous route, and we stopped in Jerusalem. We went to the Holocaust Museum. And I had never really studied the Holocaust, and I read every piece that was in there at that time. And I came out, and I went off to a corner for about 15 minutes, and I cried. And Stu had the same reaction I did. He went off to a corner and cried. And then we walked to the old city, and we were walking through Jerusalem. And I was thinking consciously, why am I here? Right? Mm-hmm. How, I'm here, it's a gift. What does it mean, As we're walking into Jaffa Gate, right across the street, the old entrance towards Jaffa Gate, Stu looks up, he says, "Look, it's David Merchant." So David Merchant went to Fair Lawn High School with me and Stu, okay? And
You're having a reunion in Fair Lawn.
Yeah, and I knew him well. And he was the valedictorian of our high school, a year ahead of me. And he was in Jerusalem, and he met someone at the kotel, tapped him on the shoulder, and he went to Aish. He was taking classes at a place called Aish HaTorah. And he said to me, at those days, Jews for Jesus and cults were very popular. And he said to me, it's not so glassy-eyed Jesus freaky. And I'm telling you, if anybody else told me to go there, I would have went, nah. But this guy had such credentials. So we ended up checking it out.
So when you get this invitation and you decide that you're going to go learn a little bit, are you thinking at that moment that I'm going out of curiosity? Are you thinking this could be the beginning of some kind of journey? I'm wondering where your head is at when you accept this invitation.
I wasn't going to learn. I was an inquisitive person. I had a backpack full of philosophy books, and this was, intellectually, I was curious. I was traveling, and this guy is recommending as a very interesting experience. So I'm just checking it out. And I tell you, I went into a class, and the guy was talking about. I didn't realize that he was making an argument about the existence of God. And he was saying, since there's a concept in the human experience of morality, it must be that there's a higher being that put that there, and it couldn't have evolved. And I ended up having an argument with him in the whole class because I had a lot of opinions about that based on what I learned in my psychology and zoology and biology classes of evolution. Everything was based on evolution. So we bantered. And the second person sat down, and he was a rabbi. The other guy was a student. So he said he's a rabbi. And he looked really cool. He was a good-looking man. He had a trim beard. And I never saw a cool-looking rabbi. The other rabbis I saw were like really out of it. And he went around and took attendance. And he said to me, what's your name? I said, well, I'm just sitting in. So he said, so am I. So a couple of guys started laughing. And he said, there's a great sage in the last generation who was a leading scholar of the generation and wrote books that were really very, very seminal, important for Jewish thinking and life. And he was known as a very, very righteous man. And he had a nickname. They called him the Chavetz Chaim. And he said one day there was a man in his generation said, I have to meet this man. I live in this generation. I have to go and meet this man, the Chavetz Chaim. So he asked, where does he live? And they sent him to this tiny, tiny little nothing of a town called Radin. He's incredulous. How can it be? How can it be? This giant lives in this little town. And then he said, where does he live? He asked around, he lives here. And there's a small shack of a building. So he goes and knocks on the door, and someone says, come in. He opens the door, and he sees a stark room, no shades, no nothing. Just a table, a bench, nothing on the walls, books all around, and this old man leaning over. He says, I'm looking for the brilliant, all these, he said it in Yiddish, and all these accolades of this genius and righteous man, the Chavetz Chaim. And the guy says, look, I'm not so great. He's not so great, but I'm the one they call the Chavetz Chaim. So the guy says, travel, he says to him, but where's all your things? He says, well, where are yours? He says, I'm just passing through. And the rabbi turns to me and says, so am I.
We all are.
It was a great line, and he delivered it so well. And that stuck with me. I said, that's great. I said, that's good, great delivery. And I left. And I said, I'm going to come back in 3 weeks. So I came back in 5 days. I spent a week there full-time, sort of just going through the classes, Rav Noach's 48 Ways and other teachers and all this stuff. And, it's a who's who of Jewish educators. You've seen all their books, Rabbi Zelig Pliskin and Rav Noach Orlowick and others, right? And the people who were there were amazing people. And it opened up the whole world. And in 1 week, it was literally the most mind-boggling, stimulating experience emotionally and intellectually in my life, by far,
But this is what I'm so curious about, though. I imagine so many people come through those doors, and it's one thing to be stimulated by what you're learning, to debate the rabbis there, to become interested in it. It's another thing to internalize it in such a way that you start contemplating making concrete changes in your own life. So where's that point where it goes from, well, this is cool stuff I'm learning, to maybe I'm learning something about the way I want to live the rest of my life?
Well, I think back then it was such an immersive experience, and I think it's different. I think that every generation is different, and you cannot compare generations to generation. People have to understand that, And I'll say this maybe more than once in this little discussion here, but there's only one rule about education in the entire Torah, and it's I think Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, said it. It's Chanach lenar lefi darko. You have to educate the youth according to their way. It's subjective. You must present the deep ideas and the most important concepts of life in Judaism to people in a way that's relevant and geared specifically for them. So, like I told you, I was carrying philosophy books on my backpack, you know, and I had time. My future was set, you know. I was sitting pretty, and to me it was very enjoyable, and they were really good people. And I wasn't deciding that I'm going to be religious. I was like experiencing it. And of course, as I learned more and I was very open, the ideas made sense to me. So I think that I invested more time there, or I made decisions of being committed to learn more, not necessarily observe more, based on what I was receiving. And it opened up so many things. You know?
But there must be a point, though, that you can't check in as frequently as you can today with your family with a simple text, but you're talking to your family back home who believes you're having fun and traveling and enjoying your time before kind of the real world starts for you. There must be a point where the conversation shifts a little bit, that I'm getting hooked into something here that might change my trajectory a little bit. I know you see me as a nice Jewish doctor, but there might be something else going on here. Take me inside those conversations and that shift.
Right. You know, I was going to med school, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was the great American dream. They started getting nervous when I started changing my plans. It was very hard for my parents, actually. It was very difficult. They didn't know what was going on. They felt, you know, they didn't want me to be far away and to stay there. And they said that we don't have your problem with your interest in Judaism. We have a problem with giving up other things. That was the way they put it. So it was a process for them. And it took many years. The big change for them, I think it was about a year and a half after I was here. I went back to America after 3 months, and for 4 weeks, and I was in Fair Lawn. And I told them I'm going back, and I got a deferral from medical school so I could take a year off and decide. At that point, that was a pretty heavy decision. And that was a big commitment. And again, it came out of, like, say, 3 months or so, or 3 or 4 months of total immersion. So I had a lot to draw on, but it was a very heavy decision and a very difficult one. And there was very little support for me to do that when I came back to America.
Right, but was the feeling within your family when you're having those kind of heart-to-heart discussions, look, I'm deferring this because I'm going to explore Judaism for another year, and it's kind of 50-50 after that, I may then come back to go, or you already planting seeds like, and you know what, that deferral might turn into not going?
They were deathly afraid of that. And I said to them, you know, it's funny because you used to force me to go to Hebrew school. Now I want to explore, you know, my Jewish roots on a pretty high level. And you're like fighting me. I said, what's going on? What's so bad about that? You know, there was a big turning point when they came a year and a half later to Jerusalem to visit, and they came. And they saw the students and they saw the teachers, and they said they could understand much better what I was doing. And that was a big deal. After I got engaged, everything changed. They were like, ooh, grandkids. These Orthodox people have grandkids. They
That's
were
the
like
dream.
all over it. And my wife had a very similar background. My in-laws were, you know, very much like my parents. They lived in New Jersey, and they totally related. And it changed the whole game. And then, you know, we moved back to America after getting married in Israel, living here for a year and a half. And I got smicha at Aish, and I didn't go to med school. I decided not to. It was a very difficult decision, but I really had a year to think about it. It was and I don't regret that decision at all, although I like science and stuff like that. It was a good thing. And I went back to America, and we started Aish HaTorah New York. I ended up being a rabbi for Aish HaTorah. And the reason I bring it up is we had kids, and my parents and my in-laws were extremely engaged with my family and my children, even though they were completely secular. And but they came, and they were there, and they're just the greatest grandparents you could ever have. Excuse me. And in hindsight, my parents couldn't be happier. We were very successful with our children, even though my wife and I came from a very secular backgrounds. All our children are very engaged Jewishly in a very deep way, in a very involved way, and they've all lived in Israel at different times. And they all want to live here. The 3 of them are here now, hopefully permanently. Today, my mother-in-law passed away a year ago. My father-in-law has 50 great-grandchildren who are all Orthodox.
Wow.
And my parents have what do we have? We have 30-something. I don't want to say the number, but it's a growing number. But we're well into the 30s. And so it's just unbelievable. They are the richest secular Jews in the world.
But I want to dig a little deeper on this idea that you could have come home and said, look, I've chosen to live an observant life. I'm still going to medical school. I'm still going to have that career, but I'm marrying someone, and we're observant. We're going to raise observant kids, and I'm going to be a doctor. And there's plenty of people today who are balancing both. So what was it for you that said, not only am I going to live this life, but I'm going to even change my career and work in this area?
Right. So, this is 1980. I got there in March 1980. It was pretty young. And I needed to learn, I knew that. One thing I learned from me is I needed to learn, The other factor for me was that I was studying under Reb Noah Weinberg at Aish HaTorah at its young stage. So the message was very clear that we need to make a movement. Reb Noah was looking to raise a cadre of a leadership that would create a revolution in Jewish identity. So, it was part of the message, and it resonated with me, and many people, back then, many people came through, loved it, and vast majority left to pursue their lives and careers, whatever it was. And the vast majority of them did not become observant. It was it. Some did. The people who stayed, they have a great CV of what they've accomplished for the Jewish people. So it's a privilege to have been, or to be part of that group.
Well, it sounds like you were getting a story of, I'm going to transform your life, and then there's an expectation that you're going to pay it forward and transform other people's lives. And it seems like that kind of message really resonated with you and kind of fueled the whole direction you went in after that.
Yeah. But there's another thing also. See, Reb Noah, he was a very unique person. This is something, him and the Lubavitch Rebbe at that time were the 2 most giants or most driven people you'll ever meet, and very, very talented people and very learned people. And there were other people that were out there, and they understood the desperate need to reach out and to educate and engage the uninitiated Jews, or we're going to lose them. And we did. We've lost millions of Jews in America. Millions. As many as they lost in the Holocaust. When I say lost, did they die? No. But
assimilation.
They don't have any kids, or they don't have Jewish kids, and they're gone. So, it's just Jewishly. I mean, maybe their DNA is still around, but I would argue they probably don't have too much DNA out there. But it's a spiritual destruction, a spiritual Holocaust, what we would call it. And
so take me inside that time in New York. How are you starting to talk to Jewish people that you're meeting and trying to spark that flame? How are you trying to take what you had just learned and incorporate into what you're doing in New York?
I came to New York. First I went to LA to train. And New York did not have an active branch. We had one in St. Louis. We had a very vibrant program in Toronto, a new one, and in Los Angeles. Very successful programs. Those were the 3 branches of Aish HaTorah, and I was the first one to start a branch in New York without a lay leader to bring me there. They went to these places because someone in the community took the responsibility to make them successful and help out. So I went and got trained in LA, and actually the main teacher, this fantastic, brilliant teacher, was the same one who was teaching the class in Israel the first time, Nachum Braverman. And so I spent 7.5 months there. It was a real crash course in fundraising and building a Aish branch in a very sort of grassroots way. And then we came to New York, and we started in New York. Now, anybody, people like myself and all the guys who went through Aish, we got smicha, in parts of Jewish law, But really, our rabbinical expertise was in outreach. I mean, 5.5 years at Aish HaTorah, I've taught, I learned, we had the greatest teacher in the world, most innovative person at the time in kiruv content, conceptually, and so we knew how to speak to the uninitiated Jews. It's just a question of getting them in the room and getting people to back us so we can do this job. So I was there to mostly fundraise, and I brought out a teacher, David Kleinman, and we opened up a center in New York City, and it grew, and it affected a fair amount of people. I did that for 7.5 years, and then I started something else.
But give me an example of that, of the hook, of how are you talking to someone you're meeting? What's getting them in the door? What's getting them turned on, say, I'll give this a shot? And how are you getting them in like that pipeline?
Well, I mean, you have to remember, Noah was the marketing wizard of quick, pithy ideas that had tremendous depth and engagement. So I had no problem dealing with that. And then seeing how they operated in America, which was very different than Israel. When Israel, someone comes in, they're coming into the nest, they're in Jerusalem and they're out of their environment, and they can gain immense amounts in a very short time. In America, you're on their territory, you're in their place. So you have to direct the engagement on what their needs are. And I think that the number one need or interest was love, dating, and marriage. Even for a while, we called it love, sex, and marriage, just to make it a little sexier. But we toned it down a little bit. And we had content. We had a lot of teaching that was revolved about relationships. So we get young professionals, singles come, and that was a big issue for them. And what you do is you find someone who, here's the message, you're one-on-one, you've worked with them a little bit, and they have an apartment or a place, and let them invite their friends over. Home groups. Mm-hmm. So it's really not threatening. You don't want to institutionalize it. You don't want to make it a synagogue type thing. It's not ritual. We were different than Chabad. And at that time, Chabad in New York City was very, very small, if not very, they didn't have a presence really much. We were in Manhattan. And, they would make it experiential. Let's put on some tefillin, let's have a Shabbat meal or something, right? Here, ours was primarily values and ideas. Wisdom for living, right? And you back that up with Shabbat and community, and you put it all together. It's a formula that's very inviting and very enriching for people.
But your story doesn't stop there. You end up going to other unique and interesting organizations after your time in New York. Now, I know we can't cover all of it, but give me a sense of one or two of them and how those ideas evolved from what you were doing at Aish HaTorah in New York.
So some of my associates came from Israel. They started the Discovery Program. That was a very big movement. Or the Discovery Seminar to America, which was a very powerful weekend program that touched many thousands of lives in a profound way. So that was going on. And so I was sort of looking to do more. And at that time, there was an Israel program called the Jerusalem Fellowships, which started in 1985, the first trip. It was a very innovative trip. It was 15 years before Birthright. We would bring subsidizing trips. They paid airfare, but it was free otherwise, for young men and women from college to come explore Israel, their Jewish roots, Jewish values, and the geopolitical scene, which we now call Hasbara. And it was extremely successful as a program, very unsuccessful sustainability because it was very expensive and Aish couldn't handle it. And it sort of died in the water after a couple of years. So I came to Jerusalem for a meeting with the greater Aish HaTorah, and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to take over this program. And I'll raise the money, I'll recruit the students, I'll work with someone here, and I'll bring the groups to Israel, bring a summer group to Israel. And in 1991, I did the first trip. That was the beginning of my career in Israel trips, which is a big portion of it, most of the stuff I've done. And I handed over Aish New York to a guy named Yitz Greenman. But I was fortunate because the Jerusalem Fellowships became a big deal. And we built it up. We started opening up centers and campuses, building leadership. When we brought the students to Israel, we had a very high caliber of students. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan was our honorary chairman, and he got President Chaim Herzog to be the other honorary chairman. And we would be able to recruit very high-level students who had no background in Judaism to come in our program because they would meet with the top political leaders in the Knesset, the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, all these people. So it was very attractive and interesting for all of us. And then we would take them these intense hikes around the country, and then have classes, a la Aish HaTorah, which was, ended up being the most important part for them. So it was an amazing ride, and many, many people over the years went through those programs and became really great leaders in the Jewish people.
So now you've mentioned the fundraising side of this a few times, and I'm wondering, what is the pressure like of, I have this great program, I can influence so many Jewish people with it, but if I can't convince X number of people to give Y number of dollars, this thing's going to fall apart. What is the pressure on the fundraising side of this whole equation?
Well, so many good, important things happen because they're sold to people to buy into it. And I've learned over the years that people buy into things because they want to get money back from an investment and so on. But truthfully, the smartest people in the world and the best people in the world who have assets appreciate investing in things that will change people's lives and have an impact. Whether they're doing it for hospitals or they're doing it for charities to help poor people. But that attracted many people to Aish HaTorah. And Aish HaTorah discovered that our donors, for the vast majority of the time, were completely uninitiated Jews. Most Orthodox Jews did not appreciate our message, right? I mean, it became more mainstream as time went on, but in the old days, it wasn't their thing. Their kids were Orthodox. They had their own cause. They had plenty of things to support and take care of in their own communities. So they didn't relate. It wasn't desperate for them, and they were overwhelmed with charities. But we can meet business people, and we did it methodically. And we would approach them, and I would say to them, my approach was, and I learned from we shared these ideas amongst us, the different branches and so on, was like, look, this is what we're doing. We're battling assimilation, which is something you could say back then, and we want to keep it's Jewish survival. And if we don't teach Jews the why and the beauty of their heritage, they can't choose it. And what's going to be is that, they're going to just disappear. And they all knew that. So we said, well, how do we do it? We've developed, Rabbi Weinberg and Aish HaTorah, we've developed techniques, tools that we can really get them. And I myself, I'm a product of school. And I just had to go in there, right? And here I am, reaching out to the world. So we want to make more people like me and other people. So they said, great, that's one thing. Second thing is that we said, but look, I don't want to ask you for money. I can ask you for money now. Yeah, give me a few bucks, very nice. But I want you. I want you. I'm going to get you. You and I are going to study together. And I'm going to show you what we do with our students. And that's exactly what we could do. And we developed relationships, and they understood what we're doing. And over the years, our prospect donors became our students, our friends, our partners, and our contributors. And that's how we. It really
resonates with me, because 3 of my closest friends now are people that were chavrusas, and you think you're starting off studying together, but you take little breaks and you start to become invested in each other's lives, and you're really hooked into these people. But I think what I see you doing now, it seems like your model has changed about how you engage Jewish people. When I was reading about how you organize trips now, that the model has changed from what you were doing, say, 20 years ago. So take me on that journey. Why did that change?
Well, the world changes. I look at myself as a social entrepreneur. I love to build organizations. I love to understand the market and the need and go through it. So I've always experimented with new projects and new ideas, and I've started new organizations. A lot of them revolved around the Israel trip. But there was also things going on at the same time. Birthright told me that idea they got was influenced by the Jerusalem Fellowships, except they had super duper gigantic donors that, they had a $1 billion budget. We had to scrap it together. And when Birthright started, I went to them, I said to them, you can't exclude us, you know? So we became one of the original organizations that was part of Birthright. But it wasn't really for us. What it did is we didn't really find our place with it. I merged our initiative with the OU, with Israel Free Spirit, and I gave him my staff, and I said, here, I work with David Felsenthal. And we focused on sort of the next trip. And we had campus stuff going on before Birthright came around. We shifted over to campuses saying like, look, why don't we have what's called built-in follow-up? You know, rather than have people recruit people randomly from around the world and then bring them on trip and have spaghetti and throw it against the wall, hope somebody's going to stick and stay in Jerusalem, we need to be more sophisticated. And we need to make it more communal. So if we put a family or people on a campus and they're there, they establish themselves. They introduce them to many of the experiences of Judaism, a Shabbat meal, meetings, you know, a kiruv rabbi with his yarmulke and his beard or whatever it is, and having some orientation, and then coming on a trip with them. And then we designed the experience in Israel and the educational content based on the personality of the person coming in, based on the level of his students, you know, and fine-tune that experience. And then they go back with them and they could follow them up. So that was a big breakthrough. And then we also designed other programs like the Hasbara Fellowships, which was focusing on the rising Arab activism on campuses that was anti-Israel. And we had to counter that in the second Intifada in 2001. We started the Hasbara Fellowships. So we started taking a piece of the Jerusalem Fellowships, which is the geopolitics, and working on that. And then we realized that people were coming on trips, they need to take it another step. So they have to come back or go to a next program that would be appropriate for them. So we created a girls program and a boys program that was Jewel and Essentials, where instead of methodically sending them, rather than relying on people just traveling through Israel. So we had such numbers that they would come through, a graduates of our program could stay on or come back and go to these things. So we started the Wolfson family, Wolfson Foundations, which now is called Olami, being involved on college campuses and running Israel trips to bring 10,000 students on, you know, immersed outreach trips in 4 years.
So I'm just curious, as someone who has all this experience over all these years, what messaging is working today in this era of social media and instant gratification versus how you could approach this 20, 30, 40 years ago? What works now?
I don't know.
That's honest?
It's honest. I'm 63 years old, and every generation is different. And, you know, back then, when we reached out, we were college students. We knew exactly what to say to college students. And we were young professionals, married. We knew exactly how to talk to our peer group. And when we got older and had kids, we knew how to deal with families, right? I could do kiruv with seniors all day long, you know? And I probably wing it with younger people, but it's a different world, you know, and the world's changing faster and faster. And look what's going on now. What's the message? What are they hearing, right? It's radically changed in the last few years. Radically. So, like I said before, you have to educate a person to where they're at. Fidar kol. So you have to understand where they're at and talk to them. And no one understands that better than young people. So I've spent a lot of time, I've trained a couple of organizations, Next Door and other initiatives, focusing at young people who have a passion, an idea that they want to develop something, and teaching them the business skills on how to build an organization and make a movement. If Noach used to say, people make an organization, and an organization makes a movement. So on that principle, I want to help them make very sustainable, effective, business-like nonprofit organization. I started an organization called Next Door, which is what that's about, and we work with about 80, almost 90 organizations. You know, that's very valuable. So I'd like to do more of that, and I do on an individual basis. But it's very important. So I feel like, you know, it's a young man's game. It's a young woman's game. You have to relate to where they are. You have to know their culture. When you're dealing with Sephardim, we're dealing with Persian Sephardim versus Moroccan. They're different. If you're dealing with people in South America, they all have their idiosyncrasies in their cultures, and you have to speak their language to be able to make that connection and share the common values that they don't even know exist.
That's beautiful. And coming from someone who spent their life meeting just thousands of people who are on these journeys, I appreciate that coming from you. And it's a perfect transition into the 5 super fast lightning questions I'm going to ask you to close out the interview. So get ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right. Question number 1. If you could go back, what would you tell the non-observant version of yourself as a child about living an observant life?
I would wait till we grew up a little bit. You could hear it. Yeah.
What age would you give it?
College. College, because you get to a point where you're emerging as a person, and you're struggling with your own identity. And that's when you're asking questions.
So the message to the 5-year-old version of yourself would be, call me in 15 years. We're going to have a nice chat.
Yeah, or chill, have a nice time. You're cute. Feel good about yourself. Be happy.
Question number 2. What do you think is the biggest misconception about living an observant life?
Yeah, Bill used to say this, and I'm saying it myself, They have no idea how much fun we're having. It doesn't look it from the outside. And the misconception is how rich life can be if you live a very motivated, disciplined life.
Question 3, let's say you have now inspired someone on this podcast who hasn't ever taken a step towards an observant life. What would you recommend would be a great first thing or first step for someone to do who's inspired by the words they're hearing from you today?
Well, really, there's so many avenues online, and there's tons of stuff to read or listen to out there. Aish.com is a good place, Chabad. Explore. Can you imagine, someone's living in dire poverty for year after year after year, and he's living in a broken down shack of the original house of his father, and, he doesn't know. And then he finds out many years later, someone tells him, your father buried a treasure right in the middle of your living room. And all you had to do is just dig it up, and there's millions and millions of dollars there. So that's the Jewish people, right? Search, go look, you will find. Go learn because there's so much there, and it'll open up your eyes.
And that's the perfect lead into my last lightning question. Let's say you've inspired someone not only to change their life, but to say, I also want to get involved in kiruv. What do you think is the first step there for someone who wants to play a role?
Well, same thing I do. Investigate, ask people. I'm always looking to do new things. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Alav Shalom, passed away not so long ago. Such an artistic, beautiful guy. He gave a short little thing, and he explained that the things that you do well and you're passionate about, you really enjoy, when they match up to things that are needed by other people and are missing, when you match them together, then you're doing God's work. So you have to look at yourself, right? Jeff, this is something you have a passion with, you do it well, and it's needed, then you're doing the right thing.
That is beautiful. Chanan Kaufman, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Saturday to Shabbos. It's been a privilege to have you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to join you, and I wish you well and should be very successful.
Saturday to Shabbos is produced by Gary Wallach. Our executive producer is Rabbi David Pardo. Our theme music is by Paul Uden. To learn more about us, please visit tachlismedia.com. That's TACHLIS media.com. Tell us what you think about what you've heard, or suggest a story we should know about by emailing shabbos@tachlismedia.com. I'm Jeff Cohen. Thanks for listening. Please check with us often for more stories of inspiring Jewish journeys. Saturday to Shabbos is a Tachlis Media podcast.